Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast. Today, my guest is Ken Ward. Ken has the title of International Technical Marketing Manager for Electromedia, which is an Italian firm in the audio business. However, he also is the lead educator in Educar training. Today, we're going to be talking about why being a predator in sales is a really terrible idea. So, without any further ado, Ken, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Marcus.
Pleasure. Would you mind giving the audience 60 to 90 seconds potted history on your career?
So one of my very first jobs was phone sales for, I don't even remember what we were selling. I just remember that we had a boiler room with outbound phone calls, and I was there for one day. And I was 19 years old. And as I left, I let them know I wouldn't be back the next day. And they said, "But you're one of our best." And I said, "That's why I'm not going to be back." Um, I said, "I've done the math. I've looked at the room. There's no way to win here. The math doesn't work." And my father really agreed with this. I was living at home at the time, and he said his feeling about sales was that once you sold something, you wanted to avoid the customer at all costs because you might have to deal with their unhappiness. But after working in construction and digging ditches and doing things like this, I ended up getting a job at a home and car stereo store, and I had to learn how to deal with people. Now, I should back up a little bit more. I grew up in a religious denomination that proselytizes actively. I was raised in a religious denomination that knocks on people's doors on Saturday morning and wants to share a few thoughts from the Bible. And so when I went into retail sales in an electronics store, many of my friends were amazed that I would want to deal with the rejection that comes from sales. And I said, these people walked into the store to look at what we do. I'm not knocking on their door during the Saturday game on the television. I'm not getting them to set a dog on me or point a gun at me to leave their property. This is easy. This is cake. But one of the things that I read a few sales books and I had some training. And one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of the people that were involved were really focusing on trying to get people to do what they wanted to do. There was a lot of focus on what I will call manipulation. There wasn't a lot of awareness of win-win or that concept in the 80s was pretty new. And over to my career, I kind of drifted back and forth between positions where I would sell. Have had positions where I've sold B2B to an existing account base. Sometimes that's gone well. Sometimes it's not gone as well. And one of the things that I realized was that I had a real affinity for the product. I didn't think this made me special, but apparently there's a lot of folks that don't know much about their product and really focus on the other activities in sales. And so I had some thoughts and done some trainings about sales over the years. And I thought, why don't I write a book? And that's the book Selling Sustainably that I put together. But the concept behind it is something that is not unique to obviously this is what you're doing every day. The idea here is that sales, in my mind, is decision facilitation. And facilitation, the definition of it is making things easier. And
Absolutely.
so you're there as a salesperson. I'm there to support the decision. And I remember in my interview with the vice president of the 7-store electronics chain, I thought that all I needed to do was know the product well enough to earn the sales. And he hired me anyway. He hired me anyway. Because it turns out that that's not all that you need to do. You need to understand yourself and you need to understand other people. And you need to have their benefit in mind. The way that my first job unfolded, I didn't realize this at the time, but this 7-store San Diego electronics chain had a tent sale every summer, and they would hire people just for the tent sale, salespeople just for the tent sale, who were internally referred to as fresh meat. And they would send the new guys to the tent sale, and they would send the bottom of the barrel of their existing employees to the tent sale temporarily, and they would put in a couple of stars, and the stars would pull the train. And at the end of the tent sale, they would lay off the worst performers, and that's how they would bring in fresh employees. So without realizing it, I passed a test when I was first hired. I performed well enough to not be laid off. I remember looking at the tent and picking out one particular area of the tent that had speakers in it and saying, this is going to be my specialty, and learning everything I could about what was in that area of the tent and doing well in that area. And I don't know if that was a winning strategy or not, but that's what I did. It was a lot harder to find things out about one's offering before the internet. It always amazes me now when we run into a lack of knowledge about somebody's category, because it's so much easier today to know about your category than it was back when I started and we were using telegraphs and carrier pigeons. But in my category, which is car audio, very niche sort of thing, we have a lot of people who have come up in the category starting out as technicians. And as technicians, if they ever interacted with the customer would often ask for their advice and accept it with a high value because they didn't have any skin in the game. They were not perceived to have any sort of motivation one way or the other. And eventually, a lot of these people start their own shop. They never had been through selling training and they viewed it very negatively. They tend to view it as a bad thing. Anybody that's going to tell me how to sell is going to tell me how to do things I don't want to do with my customer. And that pains me because that makes commerce accidental. If you're avoiding an entire area of study because you're afraid somebody might say the wrong thing or be unhappy, that doesn't seem very professional to me. It doesn't seem very intentional. I think the world would be better if more of us acted with intention. I think that if more of us were clear about what our goals were with ourselves, that the world would be a better place.
You wrote Selling Sustainably, and I note on page 34, you suggest that psychopaths and sociopaths stop reading.
I did have a acquaintance of mine who owns a shop who bought this book for one of his employees and gave it to him to read. And he texted me and said he came back and said he stopped reading after he got to page 34. And I said, I don't know, you should watch that guy. The first part of the book, I read somewhere that when I was learning about how I might want to write the book, different ways to structure it, and I decided to break it into 3 parts. And the first part is about the rules. And the rules, the 4 rules, have 2 fundamental reasons for existing. And the first one is to actually give the reader permission to read the rest of the book. Because as I mentioned a moment ago, I have a lot of potential readers in my category who almost are allergic to the idea of professional sales or about the idea of selling in general. And they think the same sort of thing that I thought when I got hired on. If I just know enough, my customer will buy from me. So the 4 rules are there first to give the reader permission to examine this, to study this. The second one is to keep us out of ethical trouble. The second one is to give us a guideline. And the more I thought about the 4 rules, the more I thought that they could probably be some sort of very basic fortune cookie sort of rule for life. I could probably write an entire book about the 4 rules. So rule 1 is always tell the truth. And that's pretty simple, but it addresses what I think is the big elephant in the room with selling. I think you asked the question, should we lie? When should we lie?
When is
How
it
should that
okay
work?
to lie to your prospect or customer?
And my position is that it's not.
Ever.
And that's pretty simple. And for the people that actually are avoiding sales because of their ethical concerns, that should dispel some doubts. But if you are trying to spend a lot of time thinking about how to lie properly, an old coworker of mine told me that there's no right way to do a wrong thing. And this falls right into that. Am I going to say that I've never done it? No, I think that we've all erred, and I've certainly erred. But I can look back and say, yeah, that didn't help. And sometimes, yeah, that really hurt. In retrospect, I don't see any time that it was the right time to do. And when I did, I failed. I failed myself. I failed the customer.
You fail the company as well.
Yes.
That's a lose-lose-lose outcome. And I think we all learn from our mistakes, but generally we lie either out of fear or because we've been told that it's okay and we allow our moral boundaries to be stretched, in which case it's not honesty and integrity are not your values. So that's a challenge because if they're not, then sales is definitely the wrong profession because your customers are depending on you to give them clarity, give them good direction because they don't want to regret the purchase. And
in most of the time that I've been a salesperson, I have not been the owner of the business. Most of the time, I have been an employee of another company. So the company owns the inventory, or the company owns the offering. The company owns what I'm selling. The only thing that I actually have to include is my integrity and the value that I create. And if I'm violating that, I'm actually taking value away because I'm not selling my stuff most of the time. I'm only selling me and what I bring to the party, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think where most salespeople get it wrong is they think the transaction is where the sale happens. But in my mind, what we're really trying to do is attract customers for life. Even if you're selling a commodity, odds are they're going to want more of it. And if you've mistreated them, then why should they come back? It doesn't stand to any reason for us to go out and constantly have to keep hunting for new business, which is why most sales organizations are spending their time trying to backfill a hole they created, and they're tripping up over what came before.
it's a really well understood rule of business that it's a lot less costly to retain repeat customers than it is to find new customers over and over and over. And a I spoke a couple of years ago at a conference for retailers, and generally I speak to a lot of technical people, but in this case, I had a number of non-technical people in the audience. And when I did my keynote, I had a lot of people looking at me as if I had two heads. And then the next day, I spoke in these little breakout sessions where the people from the main keynote would come in little groups and we would talk about things. And I decided to change my introduction. And what I said when they came in, because they were all good business people, they were not all technical. And so I explained that we know it's less costly to retain a customer. We know that we want to have customers for life. You have other breakout rooms in this seminar right now dealing with remarketing to your existing customer base. So we are going to talk about a customer retention program for the next 60 minutes called Making the Car Sound Really Fucking Good. And a friend of mine who put on the seminar came over to me and said, "Why didn't you lead with that yesterday?" And I said, "Because I didn't think of it yesterday. I thought of it last night when I was wondering what to do to try to salvage this." And that's how I look at it. If I've become a subject matter expert, it's because I want to keep those customers for life. So that's rule one, is to always tell the truth. There is a bit in there about also telling the truth to ourselves, because generally we don't start lying to other people. We generally start lying to ourselves.
I think the danger of lying is, first of all, you have to remember a lot. The second thing is, whilst people may forgive you, they're very unlikely to forget. And that harms your repeat, your expansion, your renewal, your referrals. And if you want an easy life in sales, overcome the short-term fear that you're going to lose the sale, which you cannot do. You can't lose what you never had. Simple as that. So it's not your sale. And this comes from a complete misunderstanding of where the priorities are. The best salespeople I know put the customer's desired and intended outcome and best interests above any sale, and they protect the relationship, even if it means that the customer doesn't buy or buys from a competitor. And in fact, the best ones will willingly hand deliver them to a competitor if what they have is a better solution.
And I have an anecdote about that. For 10 years, I owned a uh, car audio shop in Portland, Oregon. On Thursday, the phone would ring, and the person calling would say, "I'm calling around to get prices on putting a radio in my car." And I would respond like this. I'd say, "We are happy to help if we can. We're a bit of an unusual car audio shop, and I want to explain that up front. First of all, if you're calling around on price, we're probably going to win because we have the highest hourly rate in town. And And secondly, if you're working on a tight time frame, we might not be your best resource because we are currently booked out 3.5 weeks. And 80% of the time, maybe more, the response would be, "Oh, I'm looking to get a radio in my car so I can go to the beach this weekend," which is about 2 hours away. "Okay, I'm sorry that we wouldn't be able to help on that time frame, but if you like, I can give you a phone number for one of those places that has installers standing by." And they'd say, "Great." And I'd tell them 503-653-0800, which is the number for the local Stereo King that the owner, I know the owner. And when he found out I'd been sending him leads for 3 years, he was very pleased. But 20% of the time, someone would say, "Wait a minute, if you have the highest hourly rate in town, how are you booked out 3.5 weeks?" And I'd say, "Well, that's a great question." And I would explain what we did and what our goals were and what kind of projects we usually ended up doing. And sometimes I would hear, "Well, this car is my mother-in-law's and we're going to sell it, but I have a Mercedes C-Class and I would like to come in and talk to you about doing audio." And that one thing was consistent. Everybody was very happy with me at the end of the conversation. "Thank you very much. This has been great. I'm glad I called. I'm going to call these guys right now. Thank you for," and I can't tell you how often the last thing was, "Thank you for being honest with me." A lot of people in my industry can't believe that I turned away all that work, but we weren't set up to do that kind of work. We weren't set up to be available for it. It would be a really long square peg round hole kind of process where they weren't going to get what they wanted on their time frame, and they probably were not our target customer. So everybody, that was a win-win to me as the owner of the operation.
Well, to build on that, I think one of the most important things that we can do is identify who our ideal customer is, but then we need to look at two other variants. One is the non-ideal customer. So these are people who should never buy from you. And then there is the anti-ICP, the anti-ideal customer profile. And these are people who could buy but won't. And for some reason, they will drag on the process, they'll stay in for a long time, they'll suck you dry, and they will be unhappy eventually. And we need to be very clear that most of the market, most of the total addressable market, is not your ideal customer profile. In my case, it's maybe 3% of my total addressable market. My serviceable, obtainable market consists of a very specific group of people. They're typically founders in the 5 to 20 million mark. They're not looking for a quick fix. What they're looking for is sustainable business. They're looking to scale, but not by sacrificing their values and not by burning their people out. I can rattle off a whole load more, but for the purposes of brevity, understanding who very clearly is your customer is critical. And understanding that your anti-ICP is Mr. Bean in a tux. It's not going to deliver the outcome that you want, and it will inevitably backfire.
That first bit that you described, and I realized I may have insufficiently examined this in the book, maybe this is for the second edition, but what drives that is fear. If you're afraid of scarcity, if you're afraid of this not working out, then every peg is going to try to be going into a round hole. And you waste a lot of time, you create a lot of ill will, and you make yourself less effective for the customers that are your customer. I see this a lot in the car audio business. The shops that are successful are the ones who have a very clear idea of what their customer is. And the shops that struggle are the ones who try to be all things to everyone and try to close every deal. That's a survival-based behavior. It's not a success-based behavior. That's not doing what becomes successful. That's trying to avoid going out of business. And a colleague of mine used a phrase a few years back, going broke on the installment plan, to describe business owners who were following an unsustainable course. And I think that's what happens when you try to be all things to all people, is you're going broke on the installment plan.
So if we look at your career, obviously you've spent a lot of time working with customers, and I'm curious about how teaching this within your own business and within other businesses then spun off in terms of payoffs, such as retention of staff, reduce conflict, reduce turnover, increase profitability.
I've hired a few people in the past who were not sales oriented, and I've had great results with them becoming professional account managers, learning what to do and what not to do. When I sold my business to my partner, one of the reasons that we did it when we did was because we had found someone to take my spot as the head of sales, who had good technical knowledge, which is the hardest thing to find in our industry, is someone who will be in sales and have technical knowledge, and also really adopted our philosophy of taking care of our customer, and just when deciding someone's not our customer and being clear on who that is. And that might be a good lead into the second rule of the book, which is serve everybody. And
that's not sell for everybody, that's serve everybody. In case
serve everybody. I already told the story about sending people to the competitor. That was, if someone walks in and they're lost, giving them directions is service. If I want people to be happy they spoke with me. And that can be difficult in, say, outbound calling situations. Not everybody's going to be happy that they spoke with you. And I think it's really important to understand why people would be happy that they spoke with you. Also, serving everybody means all the constituents. In any company, you have people that are involved with the completion of the sale, whether it's the billing, the invoicing, the implementation, the ongoing maintenance. There are people who are involved with supporting the ongoing relationship with the customer. And in the car audio world, it's the installation department. It's the people that actually take the car apart and execute the plan and then put the car back together. And the old joke about car audio is, while that is happening, the salesperson goes in the back and smokes a cigarette. And this happens in a lot of businesses, where once the sale is made, there's no through line. There's no, the customer is dropped. That's not service in my mind.
It's really important to make the point. If you don't think of the entire go-to-market function as one organism, then you create silos. And what then tends to happen, I think part of the problem is, over the last 20, 30 years, we've been obsessed with the pornographic nature of metrics. And everyone obsesses about KPIs and so on. And everyone is trying their very, very best. And they may be succeeding at achieving their KPIs, but at what cost? What's the ripple effect? And you need to understand that strategy, product, marketing, the outbound, the salespeople, your customer success people, your engineers, your operations, your finance are all part of that system. And if they are not fully aligned and they don't have the customer at its heart, then what will happen is at some point the customer will become a forgotten afterthought at the end of a long chain of abuse, and they will leave or they will complain and they will raise tickets and you'll have to do rework. And it's a false economy to treat the customer as an inconvenience. We exist because of, not in spite of the customer. And they come to us despite the fact they have all this choice. And it's incumbent on us to make sure that we create the conditions where they feel safe and we empower them to make the right decision for them. So they're happy now, but they're also going to be happy down the road.
My partner and I started Music Car Northwest in Portland, Oregon, in the middle of the recession in 2009. And we had a lot of headwinds when we started. We didn't have a lot of cash. We didn't have the cash to build a beautiful showroom that had the ability to demonstrate all of our products. And we thought, how are we going to do this if we can't demonstrate the product? So that's kind of an old expectation in our industry. You have to have a demo room. And so what I decided to do was something called the Music Car Performance Guarantee. I believe it's still in place there. And the Music Car Performance Guarantee says that if you buy a Music Car certified sound system, you have 30 days to make sure you love it. And if it's not what you love, at your option, you can either return it and get a complete refund, including all installation fees and no holdbacks at all. You'll get your credit card fees back. There won't be a restocking fee. You will get your installation refunded. You will not be out anything but your time. Or if there's something you don't like about it that you would like to change, you have 30 days to let us know and we will work with you and we will change what you have to make you happy. It's your choice. And we said, if this doesn't work, we'll find a way to build a showroom. And here we are 16 years later, and there's still no showroom. Because when it came to safety, the whole purpose of policies like this is to give people confidence that if they make a mistake, it won't be catastrophic.
You take away their risk.
Yeah, it's a risk amelioration approach. And this was very effective with people to say, okay, even if I might make a mistake in what I select, these guys will be there for me. They will take care of it. And I was a member at the time of a group of owners around the country who had shops. And someone asked, what kind of policy do you have for refunds? And a lot of people shared their policies, which were very black and white and combative and not friendly at all. And I shared this one. There was a whole lot of surprise that I would have a policy like this. And I said, well, two things. First of all, I don't want anybody out there driving around saying they're sorry they bought something from us. If I end up not making any money off the deal, but someone at least is not actively unhappy, that's better for me as a business owner. But secondly, what's a Music Car certified sound system? And the other owner said, well, we don't know. I said, it's whatever the hell I say it is. If a customer comes in and wants to do something dumb that we don't want to stand behind, and we need to take the job, we can decide to say, Mr. Customer, if that's what you want to do, we will do that for you. It doesn't fall underneath our Music Car certified umbrella. It's a custom job. And I need you to understand that this is your system design. And if we're going to work with you on it, I need you to understand you're owning that. And that's my out at the beginning if somebody wants something stupid, because sometimes people come in and want something that is different than what I would do. And sometimes what we would say is, we don't want our name on that. If you do that, you're going to be mad at somebody. We don't want it to be us. Well, and I've said that literally to customers. Whoever you pay to do this, you're going to be unhappy with them. And we don't want it to be us.
Absolutely. And I think that's perfectly fair. It's one of the big problems, I think, that a lot of salespeople and sales organizations have, which is they tend to avoid the difficult conversation. If you're going to fight, have the fight at the beginning, not at the end. Be absolutely empirically clear and make sure there is zero ambiguity, because the brain's default setting to any form of uncertainty, even 1% uncertainty, is to catastrophize and go to the worst case scenario. So what we never want to do is create the conditions where the buyer's brain is anticipating buyer's remorse before they bought. So you tell them very clearly what to expect. And one of my mentors, Charlie Green, who wrote The Trust Equation, Trusted Advisor, and various others, he makes the point, never under-promise and over-deliver either. Deliver exactly what you promise. Because if you do that, you've lied twice. And even though it may be a good outcome, what you do is you create that uncertainty in their brain, and then they're thinking, well, what else have they hidden? Even at an unconscious level. And so the rigor here is to be scrupulously honest, radically transparent, and hold nothing back. And I'm minded of Mark Twain's quote, which is, well, there are two. Never lie, that way you never have to remember anything. And the second one is always tell the truth. It confounds your enemies and surprises your friends. And I think if we live by those maxims, it removes so much strain because you'll project out that you're hiding something, even at an unconscious level. Their unconscious mind will pick up on it, and then there'll be that niggling doubt. And you
They won't know
start
where
to,
it's coming from necessarily, but it will be there.
absolutely. And then what you start to see is that middle of the pipeline bloat that gets constipated, where you're chasing people. Well, why would you create the conditions to make your life even harder? It just seems to me an insanity.
So most shops, when you visit most installation shops, the door to the installation bay has a sign on it that says no entrance, employees only, insurance reasons. There's some big scary sign that's intended to keep you away from where your car is. And after 3 years at Music Car, we moved to a larger facility that we got to plan out because the building was being renovated. And we got a big glass wall between the showroom, the waiting room, and the car area. And when we bring people in and someone says, well, I'm interested in doing something with my car, we would take them and walk them through the fitment shop and let them see cars in various stages of disassembly, which is very rare for our industry. It's becoming more common, but 15 years ago, it was very rare. And it instantly would put people at ease because they said, okay, I see what's happening. I see how you take care of things. I see how you treat the car when I can't see it. And that's one of the things that I mentioned actually in the book is that there are some customers, and they're often in a particular area professionally where they're executives, they have some kind of leadership position. And what they're doing when they're making a purchase decision is it's a beauty contest. It's an audition to see if you can do the job and that they trust you to do the job. And once they get to that point, the audition's over. And if you continue to try to audition, you're wasting their time. So it's important to remember you're demonstrating your ability and your intention to do the job they want. You're not treated that way. You're
Well, I
providing
think
information.
I think it's also important to make the point that it is not your job to persuade. You cannot convince anyone of anything, to do anything, to buy anything. They must convince themselves. So to come right back to the beginning, your job is to facilitate buying. And your job is to facilitate making the best possible decision for them, for now and the future, whether they buy from you or not. And you put their interest, their outcome, and the job that they are hiring you for ahead of any one transaction and ahead of your commission, ahead of hitting your quota. And the moment you deviate from that, you move from being their ally to either being their accomplice or their adversary, neither of which are good long-term positions.
That actually leads into the fourth rule. The fourth rule is make things easier. And part of that is decision facilitation. And one of the things that we delve into more that I did not realize for the first 10 years that I was in sales was what's going on below the surface of the waters. And probably the best example I can give here is for 10 years, I owned this business, and I would get business owners that would come in, and at the very beginning, they might do this. We both act like we own the place, which irritates me because I really do.
Yeah.
And we talk for a bit, and then they leave, and when the door swings, we both say the same thing. That guy is an asshole.
Yeah, it's willy
And we're
waving.
both right.
Yeah, you're just willy
But
waving.
but nothing got done.
Yeah.
We're both right. Great, congratulations, we're right, and nothing positive happened. So approaching that situation from a different point of view, which is what do they need? If a buyer has a very commanding sort of persona, if they have a very I call those directors, where they want to snap out orders and that sort of thing. Oftentimes they have a deep rooted concern or fear that if they don't control everything, stuff will go wrong. So they've learned to take a high degree of control because that feels safe to them. And if the first thing that happens when they start interacting with me is I start to try to drive the bus all the time, I'm taking that safety away. Now, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to create that sort of interaction? Oftentimes it's because I don't understand myself. I may have that same concern. I'm maybe trying to control things to put my safety ahead of theirs. And I may not understand that about myself. And once I understand that about myself, ideally, I can let go of that and I can put my customer safety, psychological safety, emotional safety above my own. And that is where value gets created.
And this is why buyer safety is critical, but also we need to create seller safety. If your salespeople do not feel psychologically safe to tell the truth, to challenge the customer politely, respectfully, kindly, if your salespeople don't feel safe to encourage the customer to buy elsewhere, then you are creating systemic dysfunction. And I understand why people do it. However, it doesn't justify it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And one of the paradoxes that you'll learn over the years through scar tissue and through screwing up is that if you want control, you have to give it up. If you want trust, you have to give it first. If you want other people to be vulnerable, you have to be vulnerable first. And all of these things take enormous amounts of courage until you actually do them. And then life becomes significantly easier and more clear.
And when someone is operating, and everybody has uh, defense mechanisms or safety mechanisms, some people are aware of them, most people are not. But remember, it's not about us.
Yeah.
Okay. They
You're
generally
irrelevant.
have perfectly legitimate reasons to be concerned about this. Whether we're talking about childhood events or business experience as an adult, people have plenty of evidence to be concerned about what they're concerned about. And for us to either ignore it or make it about us is silly. They have legitimate concerns. They may not voice them, they may not be aware of them, and they have legitimate concerns. My wife is a certified public accountant. I think it's chartered accountant in the UK. And one of the things that I have learned about this field is that it's kind of like engineering, and that it tends to attract people who place a really high value on precision. It tends to attract people who place a really high value on not making mistakes. And these are the people that you love them. I love my wife. Picking where to go for lunch, however, is not always quick. Okay. Because making a decision, avoiding an error, is a higher value than completion. We'd rather not be wrong than finish. And that makes us late for lunch. The best sale I ever made in my life, the one I was ever proudest of, was not a sale at all. It was an internal presentation to a vice president of finance that would approve a repricing of our most popular unit in a manufacturing setting, which had our market share had eroded year after year after year because we were priced out. And as a product manager, it was my desire to reprice it, to acknowledge some market situations that had changed over the last 10 years. And the concern from the executive group was that if we repriced it and the unit volume stayed exactly the same, we would just leave money on the table. So this guy was concerned about that. However, I was counseled before this meeting that he really was uncomfortable with one-on-ones, and he has social anxiety. He's going to be really uncomfortable in this meeting. So you've seen how I talk. The entire meeting, I kept my voice right here, and I kept my hands right here, and my gestures didn't go beyond my ribs. And I spoke a little bit more slowly than I usually do. And I kept my body language calm and still. And this was not to manipulate my audience. This was to stay out of the way of the message. Anything we do that gets in the way of the message triggers reactions that may be irrelevant. So many of our younger viewers will never have heard of Abbott and Costello, but there was one called the Susquehanna Hat Company. And with Susquehanna Hat Company, Lou would approach people on the street and ask them where the Susquehanna Hat Company was, ask for directions. And every one of them would have a violently emotional reaction because of some unexpected and unpredictable association with the Susquehanna Hat Company in their past. And this is sales. When we interact with people, we discover and we risk and we discover bringing up emotional reactions that we can't predict, that are real for them. And if we do that very much, we're probably not going to get the sale simply because they're not really present for the ask. They're in react. And so when I say make things easier, the biggest element of making things easier is meeting the customer where they are and avoiding as much as you can the Susquehanna Hat Company sort of responses, the giving them a reason to do that. And a lot of that is seeing what they need and figuring out if you can give it to them. Now, the desperate part is figuring out what they need and giving it to them whether you should or not, right? That's closing on price. That's throwing it. That's unsustainable business. But making things easier is finding ways to not get in the way. And so I love to speak loudly and I love to gesture and I love to take up a lot of space in the room. And some people are not comfortable with that. And if I can put that on the back of the bar in favor of the opportunity, my my offering has a better chance of being judged on its merits. And that's what I'm looking for. I want to get out of the way. I want the offering to get a fair shake. And if I treat every customer the same, I'm not doing that.
Well, I think it's really important to understand that you are not important in the sale. Your customer is coming to you to rent an outcome. Your job is to make that decision as safe and sustainable as possible and not make it about you. Your job is not to be the hero, your job is to be the hero maker. So if they make a decision that they are happy with sustainably over a long period of time, then they become the hero in their own story. And it isn't about you, it's not about your quota, it's not about your boss, it's not about hitting target. It's all about creating the conditions where they can buy safely and confidently and be satisfied that they made the right decision. And that really is it. Everything else is complicating things. So we're coming to time shortly. So what I'd like to do is get a sense of um, why do you think so many sales methodologies and sales trainers and managers spend their time overcomplicating the sale? What is it that drives that behavior and that thinking?
That is a great question. One of the reasons that I decided to write a book was that I had been given books and given run through programs that had 7 steps and 9 steps, 12, 13 steps. And I just thought they were too complicated. I'm pretty good with complicated things, but I didn't feel a need to make them that complicated. I think today a lot of it is that there is an expectation of a lot of churn, and I think they're trying to make it a checklist that any person can do, whether they have any aptitude or not. I think that it's kind of the 3-ring binder approach to um, to staffing, where if we just put the 3-ring binder in front of them, then anybody can do the job. And I don't think that works. I think it might be a start, but I don't think it works. When I had been in sales for 10 or 15 years, I was good with some people and abysmal with other people. And in my mind, I focused on the people I was good at, and the people that I was abysmal with, well, that was their problem, and that was their loss. And I had to get to a certain emotional maturity myself to realize that the common denominator was me.
In
And
all your dissatisfying relationships, the one constant is you.
yes, and that didn't happen right away. And I've done a bit of personal growth work, and I've done some professional work. And one of the maxims that I've created is that we're the same person at work that we are not at work. It's really difficult to do professional growth if we haven't sorted things out for ourselves. It's really difficult to become a sophisticated and mature person emotionally if individually our emotions are a wreck. And so that I think that's why there's a lot of questionable methodology. I also have noticed in my field, and I think it happens in a lot of fields, is that there are a lot of people today that want to be experts. A lot of us want to be experts, and some people are better at it than others. I haven't given that a lot of thought though.
Okay. So we're coming to time now. So I'd really like to get a sense of what advice would you give your 23-year-old idiot self who knew everything, was infallible, invincible, immortal, and he would have probably ignored it, but if he'd paid attention, it would have saved him an awful lot of pain along the way.
I would have said understand my emotional life better and think about other people's emotional life better. Because when I started out in a very technocratic way where I thought that the best technical solution would win the day. And we all know that that isn't how business works. I would have told them that 70 something percent of purchases are based on some level of relationship rather than on being the best possible technical solution. I tried to gain success through expertise with the offering, and I did that too much. I over relied on that. I think that today, most people seem to undervalue it. Most people seem to value their sales panache more than they do competence with their offering. And I think there's balance involved there. I went too far one way. I think today most people go too far the other way. But it's funny that you mentioned that because my 16-year-old son is getting ready for school in the next room. He's heading out to high school. And this is a conversation we've had. What I wish I had known when I was getting ready to start out.
What would you recommend people read, watch, listen to? Are there role models that they can pay attention to who seem to do the things right? And maybe some anti-role models.
Well, I don't want to give them any more altitude than they already have. I think that if something sounds too simple, it might be. And I'm going to say that the single most valuable thing that I've done in professionally is learn about myself, whether that was through seeing a therapist, or whether it was doing group work, or whether it was taking courses. The single most valuable thing that I've done is understand myself better. And that's actually an exercise that I do in the book, where I ask people who, when you're deciding what decision-making process or mode the customer is using, who's the most important person to understand in the sales transaction? It's not the customer, it's ourselves. Because if we're knee-jerk reacting to them unconsciously, it doesn't matter how much artifice and organization we slather on top of it, our unconscious reactions will get in our way.
And you've touched on something really critical, which is self-awareness. Self-awareness is understanding how other people receive us as much as how we feel, what's going on in our head. And I would point people to the work of a chap called Dr. Albert Ellis. He's written several fantastically useful books. Um, and he developed something called relational emotive behavioral therapy, REBT. But what that does is it helps you hold up the ugly mirror objectively and to get the hell out of your own way. And of all the things that I've read, I reckon in the last 5, 6 years, that's among the most valuable of all, for the simple reason that it doesn't give you any quarter, and the process is so straightforward. What's the activating event that triggers you? What's your belief about that moment or that activating event? Then challenge it, and then dispute it, and then evaluate whether or not there is a better way. And actually, journaling using that model is incredibly powerful, because you can then get to a relatively quick objective understanding and not make the same mistake again. Einstein's definition of insanity is extremely useful here. Keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Insane. So we don't want to be doing that. And in sales, in management, in leadership, running a business, most of the time, the problems that you face are not about other people. They're either issues with yourself or systemic.
So there, when you mention that, and I'm going to look into Ellis's work. Thank you for mentioning that. There's an author named Dr. Deborah Tannen, who wrote a lot about communication, and I think I read these about 20 years ago. She did some work on male-female communication. She did some work on child-parent communication. She's a very advanced academic, but she did some very accessible, popular writing. And realized there's one of, I think the best introduction is the title is "That's Not What I Meant." And that's what introduced me to the idea of communication being when I say something and you get it, as opposed to me saying something and throwing it out there and not having any idea what the result was. And it's kind of the anti men are from Mars, women are from Venus, in that it actually has some semantic rigor behind it and some research behind it. And so I can recommend that really highly.
Excellent. Ken, we've come to time. Thank you so much. How can people get hold of you?
You can visit my website at educarlabs.com, and I've got my email contact on there. And you can also contact me on LinkedIn, WARD.
Ken Ward, thank you.
No, thanks for having me.
So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you found this useful and insightful, then please get in touch with either Ken or myself. Comment, like, share, tag someone who should perhaps listen to this episode. And if you need any help, please reach out. If you're a founder and you're looking to scale, but you don't want to do so by being involved even more, getting in the way, if you don't want to have the stress, then get in touch, because that's my area of specialization, and I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling.